Book 1, Chapter 1, Bran 1. The book A Game of Thrones officially begins through the POV of Bran, aka Brandon of House Stark, the third son of Lord Ned Stark, the third born child of Ned and Catelyn Stark. The chapter begins with Bran, whom at this point in the book starts off his journey as just 7 years old. Bran is with his male siblings, Robb Stark and Jonsnow, as well as their father, Ned Stark. They are on their way to watch their father take care of the king's justice, which involves sentencing a man to death and carrying out said punishment. This was the first time he had been deemed old enough to go to one of these executions or Ned Stark carrying out the king's justice. We also learn of the name Mance Rayder, and this is the first time his name gets brought up. And Mance Rayder is known as the King Beyond the Wall. King of who? Wildlings. And as we know from the prologue chapter, wildlings are a group of people that live beyond the wall and essentially govern the land of just quote unquote uncivilized people, right? They're viewed as barbaric savages, and Bran himself has these prejudice against the wildlings. But Bran's a child; he's only been told certain things, and the free folk, as they're also known as amongst themselves, not wildlings, they're very complicated, and honestly, they're not too far off from any and everyone else who's in any form of civilization that's all throughout Game of Thrones. They're honestly not that different from the wildlings, in my opinion, at least. We do have proof of that, just not yet, and we will get to it and when we expand more on the lore of the wildlings. So we learn this information about wildlings from Bran, and he learned this information from his nanny, and his nanny's name is Old Nan. Old Nan, good old Nan. She is honestly a great side character. We do get to spend some time with Old Nan later on in the book, and she's honestly a great side character. I love Old Nan. She's absolutely wonderful. Can't wait until we get to officially meet her. But until then, we just have this story that Bran brings up while awaiting the executioner of or awaiting the execution of a man that his father is going to murder or sentence to death. Not necessarily murder, but I not too far off, I guess, right? He's playing executioner today, so Old Nan told Bran a story saying the wildlings are cruel men. They're slavers, slayers, and thieves. They consorted with giants and ghouls. They have stolen children in the broad daylight, and they drink blood from polished horns. And their women lay with others in the long night to sire terrible half-human children. Now, this is an interesting and fascinating quote unquote story from Old Man that she told Bran. A big part of Old Nan's mythos is that she's this storyteller and that she tells stories and just can go on for absolutely years over countless stories. Due to her old age, she's seen a thing or two. Old That's part of the reason why Old Nan is such a great character. But we do get a name drop of the others again here, and we do want to take note of that. Highlight whenever we notice or see the name others get brought up, just so we can take a deep dive on all the information that's being put out there. And here is just as I've stated, quote unquote rumors or stories of wildling women seeking after the others to sire half terrible human children. So that's pretty interesting, just because we have some half wildling, half White Walker things that exist out there in A Song of Ice and Fire. Um, but the story continues with Bran continuing the chapter by describing the man who's being executed by his father, Ned. And he describes him as, quote unquote, he had lost both ears and a finger to frostbite, and he was dressed in all black, the same as a brother of the Night's Watch. So we know from that description that this is Garrett. And this is where Georgerrmartin makes the connection from the prologue to the first chapter here with Bran, because we know from his description, no ears and missing a finger. That finger, I believe, should be his pinky finger. We know that this can be none other than Garrett, and we finally learn of Garrett's fate, which is he is a deserter. Why he deserted, we don't have confirmation, but it's safe to assume Garrett, one way or another, probably ran into the others in some way, shape, or form. More than likely, seeing his dead buddies, Will and Sir Royce, joining the army of the others. So, after coming across them, he became a deserter of the Night's Watch, which is punishable by death, no exceptions. So, because of that, that is why Ned has to then ensure the king's justice is done, because they cannot allow any man to be a deserter, because once you take the black, once you join the Night's Watch, those are lifelong vows, and if you break them, you will be sentenced for death. We then get our first description of Ned Stark from his son Bran, and this is from the book, and I quote, "Long brown hair stirring in the wind. His closely trimmed beard was shot with white, making him look older than his 35 years. He had a grim cast to his gray eyes." After making note of the way his father looks in this particular moment, Bran then says that his father has essentially been replaced by the Lord of Winterfell in an instant. And this is just a great comparison of Bran noticing the man before him that he knows as his father donning the cloak of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. Eventually, it's time for his father to carry out the punishment, so he brings out his totally badass Valyrian steel sword named Ice. Valyrian steel, this is the first time it gets mentioned in the books, chapter 1 Bran. So just to expand a little bit of the mythos behind Valyrian steel in the books, Valyrian steel is quite literally the best material to forge weapons out of. And the only hindrance of it, I guess you could say, not even I guess, is that it is extremely rare, just like in the show. There is absolutely no one who knows how to essentially create more Valyrian steel. It died when the island of Valyria met its doom in a apocalyptic type manner. They, I believe, is like Pompeii, where fireballs or some kind of volcanic eruption happened and it completely sunk this island of Valyria, and it's why the Targaryens left their homeland of Valyria to begin with to start Aegon's conquest, which is when the Targaryens came over from old Valyria to Westeros and they began to unite, aka colonize and conquer these 7 kingdoms one by one to rally them because of their fate and prophecy and all that great stuff that we love these books and this franchise for. But anyways, I digress, and back to Valyrian steel. That was an old secret of the of old Valyria that was lost with the island itself. So no new Valyrian steel weapons are being made, and the only ones that currently exist, that's all that's left. So because of that, we are going to make a note that Ned Stark has a Valyrian steel sword that is in the Stark family lineage, and it's been passed down among Stark to Stark for thousands of years. Ned then gets help from Jory Cassell, who is the captain of his household guard. And Jory is another great side character. He doesn't have much, we don't spend much time with him here in this chapter. He is just there kind of in the background. But in the books, I love Jory. He is a great side character. He interacts with practically all of the kids in some way, shape, or form. And Jory is honestly great side character, and it's crazy how you really get some type of emotional attachments to all the characters in these stories, whether they're major, minor, side, it does not matter. Even to an extent, the animals, the wolves, you really care about everyone involved in the story and unraveling of George R. Martin's work. So the Lord of Winterfell then says a few words. In the name of Robert of House Baratheon, the first of his name, king of the Andals and the Royner, and the first of his men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, by word of Eddard of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, I do sentence you to die. When Ned begins to raise his sword, that's when we meet Jonsnow for the first time, as he leans to Bran to offer him some advice, telling him he needs to watch, as father will know if he looks away. In that moment, that's when Ned brings the sword down, ice, and he cuts poor Garrett's head clean off in a single swift. Bran fixated on the exact amount of blood that was coming out of Garrett's neck. It turned all the nearby snow red like wine. The head then rolled over to none other than Theon Greyjoy. This is our first time interacting with Theon, and I do want to say it's just like the show where you do not like Theon at all. George R. Martin makes an effort in making Theon a horrible person early on in the books. It's honestly crazy how he's able to just be two-faced in a sense, and literally practically the only one who likes Theon in the beginning of the books is Robb Stark for whatever reason. Like, Robb loves Theon like a brother, just as a result of them growing up together, I'm sure, as Theon is Ned Stark's ward, and he became his ward due to the fact that when Theon's father rebelled against Robert to try and claim himself his own free man, king, whatever you want to call it, and claim the Iron Islands independent of the Seven Kingdoms. They beat his ass down, basically, and to make sure they kept his ass in line, they took his son prisoner and have him hostage, essentially. And that's why Theon is with Ned Stark at this moment. So the head rolls over to Theon, and how does he respond? He then puts his boot on top of Garrett's poor decapitated head, stopping it in place just to then kick this head off to the side. Great first interaction with Theon Greyjoy, gotta say. Jon Snow then calls Theon an asshole, but Bran does note, not loud enough to where Theon can hear it. Jon then congratulates Bran and tells him how well he handled it. Bran then compares Jon's age to himself, and we learn that Jon Snow is actually just 14 years old at the start of this book, as well as Bran's bastard brother, as we learn the surname Snow in the North, and Winterfell, obviously, because Winterfell is in the North, but just in the North as a general place, that Snow is a bastard's name, and that other parts of the Westeros and Seven Kingdoms have their own bastard names. So just to name a few, I know Flowers is one, Stone is another. That's all I can really think of top of my head. Sorry. So eventually, after the execution is over, three brothers, and they begin to discuss the execution. We get a description of Robb Stark for the first time, and I quote, "He was big and broad and growing every day, and he had his mother's coloring, the fair skin, red-brown hair, and blue eyes, the Tullys of Riverrun." And then we get a description of Jonsnow. Jon's eyes were a dark gray, so dark they almost seemed black. But there was little they did not see. He was with an age with Robb, but they did not look alike. Jon was slender where Robb was muscular, dark where Robb was fair, graceful and quick where his half brother was strong and fast. So essentially, George R. Martin is telling us Jon and Robb are yin and yang. And that's just a classic trope to give brothers. Brothers are opposite of one another more often than not. Very rarely do you have a set of brothers that are just identical in both looks and personality, right? Most people like to be their own independent person, free of your environment or who you grow up with. But Jon and Robb both disagree on the specifics of Garrett's death, with Robb claiming Garrett died bravely, and Jon claims he could see the fear in Garrett's eyes. But they obviously don't know his name's Garrett. They just say the man's eyes. So eventually, the two boys move on and decide to race ahead to see who can get to the bridge that leads into Winterfell first. This leaves poor Bran behind on his little pony. Bran then begins to think about Garrett and what look he had on his face before dying and which of his brothers were right. Bran gets so lost in thought, he doesn't even realize his father catch up to him. Once he does, he decides to ask for Ned's input on Robb and Jon's conversation. Ned, instead of answering with his own opinion, he then asks Bran what does he think, surely trying to make this a teaching moment for his son. Bran then answers that question with another question, the same way any 7-year-old would. So, he then asks if it's possible for a man to be brave when he's actually scared. To which Ned answers, that is the only time a man can truly be brave. Ned then needs Bran to understand why he sentenced the man to die, as he was a deserter of the Night's Watch, confirming poor Garrett's fate right there. Continuing by adding, it's essential for the Starks to carry out the beheading themselves instead of an executioner. And I quote, "We hold the belief that the man who passes the sentence must swing the sword. If you should take a man's life, you owe it to him to look him in the eyes and hear his final words. And if you cannot bear to do that, then perhaps the man does not deserve to die." Pinpoint perfect example of the honorable Ned Stark, everyone. This is straight from the source itself, from the well. Ned Stark, one thing about him, for better or for worse, he's gonna have his honor. It's a bit controversial when, for certain reasons, I'm not gonna get into it yet, but it was after this conversation between Bran and his father that Jon reappeared in a bit of a panic, exclaiming that father and Bran need to come with him immediately to look at what Robb has found. Shortly after, all the people who were at Garrett's execution meet up under the bridge leading into Winterfell. As they approach Robb, they see him kneeling. When they ask what's lying in front of him, Robb says it's a wolf. Theon then points out that the wolf is a freak due to its enormous size. Bran then begins to study the beast from afar, noting that the dead wolf is bigger than his pony. Jon then claims it's so large because it's in fact a direwolf, the sigil of House Stark. Just then, Bran began to notice that Robb was holding something. Robb called Bran to him as he began to show Bran that in Robb's possession was wolf puppy. Robb then told Bran he could pet the pup. Bran did very nervously. The little puppy is described as a tiny ball of gray-black fur with its eyes still closed. It's nuzzled blindly against Rob's chest as he cradled it, searching for milk amongst his leathers. So the puppy is quite literally Nurse Rob. It's a great moment in the book, and just a little spoiler alert. I just want to highlight, we really got to appreciate moments like this between the Starks and the brothers, because there are very few moments like this between the brothers in the entirety of the books. This is a tragedy after all. So when it comes to moments like this where the Rob's pup, later known as Greywind, is quite literally trying to nurse on Rob because its mother was dead, and Rob essentially found it right away. So just want to point that out, and also highlight that Rob, unlike a lot of other characters from the show, is not a POV character. So just even more important to highlight moments with Rob, because the only interactions we get with Rob is through his siblings, but more so his mother, Catelyn Stark. So in Catelyn's chapters, a lot of the time she's the one talking and doing business or whatever and interacting with Rob Stark. Continuing, Rob then hands Bran his very own wolf pup, while informing everyone that there are 5 pups total. Bran then sits in the snow holding his new puppy to his face in just pure excitement, claiming its fur was so soft and warm against his face. This is such an iconic part, and I just can't help but give props to the showrunners, because they did this scene perfectly in the show. And honestly, the show does get a lot of love. I think for the first 4 seasons, when it comes to translating the actual source material of A Song of Ice and Fire to the screen, that the first 4 seasons are the most accurate. And to an extent, 1000%, I can't confirm that as reading all the books myself. And specifically, season 1 is literally the first book in its entirety translated to screen, and it's really awesome to see unfold. So that's part of the reason why I do like the first book so much, because it translates to screen perfectly, and you really see the book come to life with the first season of the show. Rob then points out the fatal wound in the wolf pup's mother, the mother Direwolf, and the wound happens to be in its neck, underneath its jaw, in the jugular. Ned investigates and pulls out a foot-long antler from the beast's neck. Now, this is super symbolic, and all the men and even the boys, Rob and John, Theon, everyone react to this. The reason being, and Bran does take note of this, but Bran doesn't know why, because he's a child. He doesn't know any better. The reason they all react to this is because the stag, aka a deer, right, is the sigil of House Baratheon. House Baratheon is the house of the current king, Robert Baratheon, the king of Westeros as of book 1, is the king. And what is going on with the wolf, the direwolf, which happens to be the sigil of House Stark? A direwolf has reappeared in the north for the first time in generations. It has been forever since the last time a direwolf has been spotted south of the wall. Direwolves are known for only existing north of the wall, and even then they are an extremely rare sight nowadays. So there just so happens to be a direwolf not only south of the wall, but this direwolf happens to be dead right before the entrance of Winterfell. And not only is it dead, but it's dead, and what killed it? An antler from a deer. The deer a stag that is House Baratheon. It's great comparison and foreshadowing of what's to come and what this possibly means. Tension between House Baratheon and House Stark. We're then introduced to another man named Hullen, who's the master of horse for Ned Stark and Winterfell. He then claims they need to kill the pups as a mercy, as they cannot survive without its mother. Theon Greyjoy agrees, instructing Bran to hand over his wolf. As Theon then draws his sword, Bran's pup squirms up against him. This is too cute. Bran's pup squirms up against him as if the wolf pup could read the room. God damn it, Theon. Count your days. Bran then yelled at Theon, telling him, "No, it's mine." Suddenly, he hears, "Put your sword away, Greyjoy." And for a moment, Bran believes it's his father giving this order. But then he turns and sees it's actually Robb, and this surprises Bran. And this is just a great instance of Robb growing into the man he was meant to be, which is the Lord of Winterfell. He's meant to take over the reins from his father. Bran then looks at his father Ned, hoping for reassurance, but instead Bran receives a frown from his father. Understanding what that means, Bran begins to cry, but he looks away ashamed because he doesn't want his father to see him. Once Robb takes note, he begins to argue back, telling him and making a defense, saying, and I quote, "Sir Roderick's red bitch whelped again last week," he said. "It was a small litter, only 2 live pups. She'll have milk enough." Then Jonsnow decides to speak up. "Lord Stark," Jon said. Bran took note of how strange it was to hear Jon call their father Lord instead of father. He continues, "There are 5 pups," he told father. 3 male, 2 female. "What of it, Jon?" "You have 5 true-born children," Jon says. 3 sons, 2 daughters. The direwolf is the sigil of your house. Your children were meant to have these pups, my lord. And Bran immediately sees a change in his father's face once Jon brings up this point. And he loved Jon even more because of it in that moment for making the case for them to keep the pups. Bran is then able to recognize that Jon essentially ostracizes himself so that the count would match for the number of wolf pups to true-born Stark children, which Jon is not, as the book tells us in this first chapter. I'll get more into Jon's heritage later, but not in this moment here. It's better chapters to get into. Anyways, this includes his sister Sansa and Arya, as well as the youngest brother, baby Rickon Stark. Bran then informs the reader that Snow is a bastard name and tells us more information of, like I mentioned earlier, it being specific to the north, as every region has a different one. After considering what Jon has to say, Ned suddenly began to lecture the boys on the responsibilities they would have as a result of these wolves, and that they won't have any help from any of the staff at Winterfell, as they are plenty busy enough. It's in this moment Bran begins to taste the sweet air of victory, as said in the book. So you just can't help but be happy for Bran as he finally gets his puppy. All the men then make their way back to the bridge, getting ready to head towards Winterfell. That is until Jon suddenly stops. Jon claims to then hear something as he heads back, but only for a moment. Once he returns, he seems to be holding something. And I quote from the book, He must have crawled away from the others, Jon said, or been driven away, their father said, looking at the sixth pup. His fur was white where the rest of the litter was gray. His eyes were red. Bran found it interesting that this was the only pup of the six whose eyes were open already. I think I did forget to mention that actually. That earlier, and when they first found the pups, that all of the pups' eyes were shut tight. They were not opening their eyes yet, as typical of canine pups. Um, but John's pup, as we come to find out, is the only pup that actually had its eyes open already. What could this mean? There's a good bit of research we could do to come to a conclusion, but at the top of my head, I'm going to be honest and I'm not sure. Theon Greyjoy then points out that since it's an albino, it'll be the first to die. Which Jon then responds, I think not, Greyjoy, as this one belongs to me. End of chapter 1. What a great chapter. Just a great introductory chapter into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire and into Westeros, to be specific. Winterfell. We are in Winterfell. They didn't say it specifically because they're just on the outskirts of Winterfell, but they're just outside the city while they did the execution and carried out the king's justice. But they just headed back into the city, and we will continue next chapter. With Catelyn Stark for the first time.